zero interest rates, negative interest rates, and all this. The question is, what do you do with your money? I mean, I'm always asked that question. And really, is it time for gold? Gold is kind of like the stepchild of the whole financial system, yet gold has been money forever. And I've always thought it was interesting. So people say, well, is it time for this and is it time for that? And today our program is possibly the smartest guy I know when it comes to the world economy, also the subject of gold, but also the subject of currencies. You see, we do not have money anymore. We have a currency. And a currency is basically debt and IOU from the government. That's all it is. It really does not exist. It's just a promise. It's like a promise from your poor cousin Willie to pay you back. I mean, that's really what it is. So the question today is it time for gold? And the smartest guy I know on the subject is James Rickards. He is a New York Times bestselling author and economist. His latest book, The New Case for Gold, comes out April 2016. And I first came across James in his book, Currency Wars. And that book just opened my mind up to what is going on in the world of currency, money, and gold. Any comments, Kim?
James Rickards is a phenomenal. I'm so happy to have him on the show. And Robert, this is your wheelhouse. I mean, you've been studying James Rickards for many years, and we were talking
gold.
And we've been acquiring gold for many, many years. But it's interesting because we talk about prophecy when you wrote the book Prophecy in 2002, and you talk about this crash that's coming in 2016, and you kind of predicted that's happening. Well, everything that James Rickards has talked about in his books is happening today too. So really important show to pay attention to what both James and Robert are saying, because they seem to kind of predict the future.
So, James, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Kim. It's great to be with you.
Nice to have you on.
Before we go, can you give us a real brief background? But I really want you to talk about Currency Wars, which, again, was your book, came out in 2011. So would you mind giving a little bit of background and how you came up with the term Currency Wars?
Yeah, no, Robert, I'd be glad to talk about that. And, of course, my first book, Currency Wars, came out in 2011. But let's go back to Currency Wars. What you're referring to is an event that took place in 2009 at a top-secret weapons laboratory located about halfway between Washington and Baltimore. And it was sponsored by the Pentagon, but specifically the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And I was asked to help organize and facilitate the first-ever financial war game. Now, of course, the Pentagon had been doing war games for decades. They didn't, involve in nuclear war fighting or naval battles or drones or missiles or whatever. They didn't need any help from me putting a war game together, but in this particular case they did, because they wanted one where the weapons would be financial. In other words, stocks, bonds, derivatives, commodities, money, etc. And it was the first time this was ever done, where you had a financial war. So I was brought in. I recruited a few friends of mine from Wall Street to join us. We had people from the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security, Treasury, the Fed, think tanks, universities. They're what I call the usual suspects. These are all people who are normally invited to these kinds of war games. But I said, look, if we want to make this realistic, let's bring in some Wall Streeters. So I did recruit some friends of mine who were prominent from different banks and private equity funds. And we did this over a couple of days. I call it, if you know the old board game that we all played when we were younger, Risk. I call this a Risk for adults, because we got to design the board game. And, we asked questions like how many days should it be and what should the teams be. So some of the teams are obvious. You'd have a United States team, a Japanese team, a European team, Russia, China. But in addition, we created a team of hedge funds and banks, because if you're going to have a financial war, obviously the hedge funds and banks are going to be involved. But when it came time to play out the game, I devised a scenario, and this I did on my own, and then got a friend of mine to help me sort of pull it off. We wanted to actually surprise the other participants. As you know, wars are full of surprises. And our scenario was that Russia and China would take their gold reserves and deposit it in a bank in a vault in Switzerland. Then they would legally create a bank in London, and that bank would issue a new form of money backed by the gold in Switzerland. So you have the physical gold in Switzerland, you have the bank in London, the bank issues this new currency backed up by the gold. In other words, it was redeemable into gold. Now, the kicker was that Russia and China said, from now on, if you want Russian natural resource exports or if you want Chinese manufactured goods, you have to pay for it in this new money. We no longer accept dollars. And obviously this was a strategic attack on the dollar, trying to run the dollar off the road, destroy it really as a global reserve currency. And then they said, if you are trading partners, if you want some of this new money, you can do one of three things. You can run a trade surplus. You can trade with us and run a surplus, and you'll get some of the money because we'll be paying you. Or you can borrow it. We'll make you loans in this new money through some bank that they create, through this London bank. Or a third way is you could deposit your own gold, take your own gold, put it in Switzerland, and go to London and pick up some of this money backed by gold. So you can just get some money the way we did by putting your gold in. And so basically a global gold standard run by Russia and China designed to exclude the dollar. Now, nobody thought this was going to happen the next day. Nobody thought this was going to be overnight. When you do a war game with the Pentagon, you want to help them look over the horizon, look over the ridgeline, as we say, 5, even 10 years out. But and one of the interesting things, Robert, is we actually got laughed at by some of our colleagues. There was a Harvard professor in particular just laughed in my face. He said, what's wrong with you? Why are you wasting our time with the scenario? Don't you know the gold is not part of the international monetary system? It never will be. And we sort of prevailed. We said, well, look, let's just play it out. War games are supposed to have surprises. Let's play it out and see what happens. And they played out in very interesting ways, all described in the book Currency Wars. But what's happened since then, when we did play this with some very interesting results, but got ridiculed by some. But what's happened since then is very interesting. It's been 7 years since we did the war game. In those 7 years, Russia has more than doubled its gold reserves. China has increased its gold reserves by 400%, perhaps more. No one knows the exact number because China is non-transparent about their gold acquisitions. But the point is, China and Russia are behaving exactly the way we predicted they would behave if you were moving towards this global gold standard. So you can laugh all you want. But these, the eggheads from Harvard, et cetera, they can laugh all they want. But China and Russia are acquiring thousands of tons of gold. That's a lot of gold. There are only 35,000 tons of official gold in the world. When I say official, I mean this is gold owned by central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and treasuries and finance ministries. There are only 35,000 tons of gold in that category. So if Russia and China have acquired, let's say, 5,000 tons, which they have, it's 15 to 20% of all the official gold in the world. That's an enormous amount. So either they're stupid or they know something we don't. Well, I have news for you. They're not stupid. You know that. The Russians and the Chinese are not stupid. So they see something coming that most people don't see. That's what we're warning about. So just to update the story, my new book, The New Case for Gold, takes that 7-year-old story, updates it for the now we're well into the 21st century, points out the threats, and makes a very powerful case, in my view, that all investors should have, I recommend 10% of their investable assets in physical gold. Not 50%, not 100%. Don't go all in. People like to put words in your mouth. They say, Jim Rickards says, sell everything and buy gold. I've never said that, and I don't think that's a good idea. But for 10%, yes, I do think you want that insurance. Let's just do what the Russians and the Chinese are doing because they see something coming.
Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Our special guest today is James Rickards, and his latest book, The New Case for Gold. His website is jamesrickardsproject.com. And as I say, when it comes to the world of money, currency, and gold, in my opinion, he is the smartest guy out there. And we're talking to you today about what's going on today. And his latest book, The New Case for Gold, is eye-opening. It is fantastic. Kim and I just read Chapter 2 of the book, and I suggest you at least get Chapter 2 if you want to find out how gold fits into the world economy. And I love what James says is that gold is not an investment. And Kim and I have been saying that for years. I started buying gold in 1972 when the dollar came up to gold standard in 71 when I was buying it at around $80 an ounce. And today it's around $1,200 an ounce. And I don't buy it for the gains. I buy gold for one reason, is I don't trust the government currency system. Any comments, Kim?
James, if I could just ask, you're talking about Russia and China accumulating all this gold. How do you see this playing out?
Well, good question, Kim. And it's not just Russia and China. They're the two biggest acquirers and the most powerful and the most prominent. But Turkey is doing this. Iran. I see other smaller countries on the list. Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Philippines. They're all acquiring gold. Now, you have to put this in context. Let's go back to the 1970s, starting in 1971, when Richard Nixon suspended the redemption of dollars for gold. Prior to 1971, now U.S. citizens could not have gold. From 1933 to 1975, it was actually a crime for U.S. citizens to own gold. It was like drugs or contraband. That's how they treated gold. You couldn't have it. But trading partners, nations, France, Germany, Netherlands, Japan, if they earned dollars in trade, they could cash it in and get gold, and they did. And there was a run on Fort Knox. In 1950, the United States had 20,000 tons of gold. By 1970, we were down to 9,000 tons. We lost 11,000 tons in that 20-year period. And the rate was accelerating. So President Nixon could see that Fort Knox was going to be stripped bare in just a matter of a few years or even less. So he shut the window and said no more redemption. So at that point, we completely went off the gold standard. But the United States continued to dump gold. In the late 1970s, we sold another 1,000 tons, so it took us down to 8,000 tons. The IMF retwisted their arms, and they sold 700 tons. But there came a time around 1980 when the U.S. had 8,000 tons. We stopped selling gold. Now, that's very interesting because the U.S. wanted to suppress the price to pretend that there was no inflation, which, of course, there was. Over the 1970s, gold went from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. That's over a 20 times or 2,000% increase. And Robert was very wise to be buying gold at that time, but it's still a good entry point even today because it's going to go a lot higher. But we dumped another 1,000. We stopped at 8,000 tons. Now, why did we stop at 8,000 tons? Why has the United States not sold any material amount of official gold in the last 35 years? I talk about that in the book. Robert, you mentioned Chapter 2, but this is in Chapter 1, so people who get the new case for gold, read all of it. But the United States then started twisting the arms of other countries to dump their gold. In 1999, the UK dumped most of their gold. Just last week, Canada sold the last of its gold. Canada is the first major developed economy to go to zero gold. In the early 2000s, Switzerland dumped thousands of tons of gold. So, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, France in particular dumped a couple thousand tons of gold. So it's like the U.S. stopped selling, but we then leaned on our allies, France, Switzerland, and others, the Netherlands, to dump their gold. That stopped. That absolutely hit a wall in 2010. Central banks, 2010 was a year when somebody flipped a switch, and central banks went from being sellers to being buyers. And you now see buyers, the ones I mentioned, again, Russia, China, and some others. So that dynamic has changed completely. Now there's just a scramble for gold. I just got back from Switzerland. I met with the head of the world's largest gold refinery. He told me he can't find gold. He's having difficulty sourcing it. He's got a wait list of buyers. See, when you're a refinery, what do? You take gold in the front door, and you send it out the back door. In between, you re-refine it. They take 400-ounce bars. They take scrap, so-called scrap, which is, bracelets, necklaces, rings, things like that. They take it from a certain purity of, they call it 2 nines or 3 nines, and they turn it into 4 nines. 4 nines means 99.99% pure. 1 kilo bars, that's the new global standard set by the Chinese. So they take lower grade gold, turn it into 4 nines, super pure gold, and send it out. They know who the buyers are. They've got a wait list, but they're having difficulty finding it. And when the price of gold skyrockets, which you can see coming, and I talk about that in the book, see, a lot of people say, I'm not going to go out and buy gold now. I'll wait till the price moves up. I know it's going up a little, but when it starts to go up a lot, I'll go out and get my gold. I have news for those people. You're not going to be able to find it. There's going to be a buying panic when you really want it. When you're like, okay, you've convinced me. I need to preserve my wealth. The dollar's crashing. I want some gold. It's not going to be a question of price. You're going to be watching the price go up on TV, but you're not going to be able to physically get it. The big guys will get it. The central banks, the hedge funds, the sovereign wealth funds. The retail dealers are going to be sold out. The mint's going to be back ordered. People are going to be saying, get me some gold, and you're actually not going to be able to get it.
I think one of the smartest guys in the financial world, James Rickards, author of the book Currency Wars, came out in 2011, The Death of Money, 2014, and The New Case of Gold, coming out April 2016. And really, ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention because we're at a very critical time in history. And I agree with Jim when he talks about if Russia and China are buying gold, maybe you should. Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, well, I would say listen to this program specifically because there's a lot of information. And one thing that James said is that everybody should own 10% of their portfolio in physical gold. And if you're saying, well, everybody says gold's not important, well, we're going to talk about why gold is so important and why maybe you should own gold as well, physical gold.
So, James, the first question I'll ask is kind of why does so-called Wall Street or the intellectuals and the elite intellectuals, like you said, of Harvard, why are they so anti-gold?
Well, let's separate the two. Great question, by the way. Wall Street is anti-gold because they can't make money off it. Wall Street is in the business of taking your money. I like to say to people, if you have a medical problem, you don't think you have to go to medical school. You call your doctor. If you have a legal problem, you don't think you have to go to law school. You call your lawyer. But when you have financial issues, and everyone does, everyone's got some savings or some money, however much, and they look for financial advice and they go to Wall Street, but you can't trust Wall Street. It's like a doctor who wants to see you in the hospital or a lawyer who wants to see you behind bars. Your doctor and your lawyer, they want you to get well and they want you to sort of keep out of jail, but your broker doesn't have your best interests in mind. So they don't like gold because there's no turnover, there's not much commission. They want to move you in and out of stocks and up and down and jerk you around. And they don't like to put you in gold because it's actually a very safe asset and it's one that will preserve wealth over the long run. So Wall Street just has that bias. Now, as far as the power elite are concerned, and Robert, when I say power elite, I'm not trying to conjure up some deep, dark, black helicopter conspiracy. I mean, these are real people. We know who they are. It's Christine Lagarde at the IMF. It's Janet Yellen at the Fed, Mario Draghi, Larry Summers at Harvard, Adair Turner at the Soros think tank. The power elite, of course they don't want you to own gold. They want to own the gold themselves. Where is the gold? Where is most of the gold in the world? Well, it's in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It's in Fort Knox. It's at West Point. It's in London. It's only in 6 or 7 locations, the vast majority of the gold. It's all controlled either by the U.S. Treasury, the IMF, the European Central Bank, Bank of England, one of a small number of institutions. So they've concentrated all the gold in their hands. What do they give everybody else? They give you digital assets. We're moving to a cashless society. And I talk to people. They say, I've got cash. I've got money in the bank. Well, no, you don't. If you have money in the bank, that's not cash. That's an unsecured liability of a financial institution. And if that institution goes down, all right, maybe you have deposit insurance. What if a deposit insurance fund fails? Or what if you don't? What if you're not covered and your amount is more than the deposit insurance? Or what if they change the rules, which the government does all the time, or do bail-ins, which they will do? In the next financial crisis, you can expect money market funds are going to suspend redemption. People say, I've got a money market fund. I could call my broker and have the cash in my bank tomorrow. Well, not if they suspend redemptions. And by the way, that did not used to be the law. The SEC, about a year ago, Securities Exchange Commission, government agency, about a year ago, changed the rules that allows the new rule allows money market funds to suspend redemptions, which means you call them up and say, sorry, we'll get back to you. You're just locked in. By the way, these are all digital assets. Vladimir Putin has a 6,000-member cyber brigade outside of Moscow. This is Russian military and intelligence assets working day and night to be able to hack your accounts. And they've actually done so. In 2010, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security found a Russian attack virus embedded in the NASDAQ operating system. So when I say things like this, they're not made up. They're not scare tactics. I'm not trying to frighten people. I'm just trying to let people know and inform people and warn people that your digital wealth is vulnerable. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to slaughter pigs, you can't run around the field and chase them. You've got to get all the pigs in the pen first, and then you have to lead them to the slaughterhouse. But what the governments are trying to do is get all the people in digital assets in one of 5 or 6 very large banks so they can be slaughtered with negative interest rates, seizures, bail-ins, account freezes, etc. But if you've got cash or you've got physical gold, you're outside their digital slaughterhouse. And so this gives you degrees of freedom. So the importance of I'll use the word brainwashing, conditioning. Look, if the central banks didn't love gold, why are they sitting on it? Right? They've got a lot of gold. They've got all the gold.
So let me ask you this question right now then. We go into ETF gold and ETF silver.
And an ETF is? Exchange
traded fund, but you say there's many claims. Like if there's 1 ounce of gold in an ETF, there might be other claims against it. In other words, maybe 90 claims against it. What does that mean?
This is what I call paper gold. And paper gold is an oxymoron because focused on the word paper, not the word gold. If you want gold, I do recommend it, as we said. I talk about this in my book, The New Case for Gold. I recommend about 10%. Get physical gold. Physical gold. Put it in safe, non-bank storage. You don't want to put it in the bank because if the government decides to freeze it, the bank safe deposit boxes are the first place they're going to look.
Yeah, interesting.
So you want non-bank storage.
So once again, our guest today is James Rickards. He's the author of The Currency Wars 2011, and his latest book is A New Case for Gold, coming out April 2016. And like I said, he's the smartest guy I know. And every time I'm around James Rickards, my mind goes into overdrive. It gets blown out. And he's talking to you today why you need to consider gold. And the last question is this: is it true that an ETF, which is paper gold or paper silver, is it true that it's like the fractional reserve system, that there are many claims against that piece of gold in an ETF fund?
Well, specifically, there are three main kinds of paper gold. There's the ETF that you talked about. There are gold futures on COMEX, and there's something called unallocated gold coming from the bullion banks. So let's say I call up J.P. Morgan London and say, hey, I want to buy $1 million worth of gold. They'll send me a contract. I sign it. I send them $1 million. They say, okay, Jim, you've got your $1 million worth of gold. But not really. What they do, they might have 1 bar of gold in the basement, and they'll sell 100 bars of gold. So they'll sell 100 times the physical gold. And this is what's called unallocated, meaning, you have a contract that says you own gold, but you don't really own a specific bar with a serial number and your name on it. They've sold the same bar of gold 100 times. Now, if everyone sits tight, that's fine. But if 100 people show up and say, give me my bar of gold, they've only got 1 bar of gold. And they're not going to be able to cover that share position very easily. So what they'll do, maybe the first guy who shows up will get his bar of gold, but everyone else is going to get a notification saying your contract has been terminated. We'll send you a check for yesterday's price to close the business yesterday. So they won't steal your money, but what they will do is not give you your physical gold. They'll send you your profits through yesterday, but you're like, wait a second, today it just went up $500 an ounce, and tomorrow it's going to go up another $500 an ounce. That's why I bought the gold. And they're going to say, sorry, you're out of luck. We closed out your contract. We terminated you. This isn't the fine print of the contracts that people don't read. Now, coming over to ETFs, the same kind of thing can happen. Now, ETFs do not technically sell, 100 times the amount of gold that they actually have. They do have physical gold, but there's a lag. In other words, between the time the investor buys the ETF and the time that the ETF operator actually goes out and gets the gold and puts it in the vault in London, that could be up to 30 days. So it's not that they sell multiple times the gold, but they do have a lag between when you pay them and when they go get the physical gold. And again, when the system breaks, and it will break, that gap is going to make you very, very vulnerable. And they can also suspend redemptions and just say, hey, we're going to give you your money back, but you're not going to get the price exposure. So all these forms of gold, and also COMEX I mentioned, they have a very small fraction of all the paper gold contracts that are out there for long. People who think, oh, I'm long a COMEX future, I can just send a notice and take delivery. No, you think you can. A small number of people can, but when everyone tries to get the physical gold at once, the exchange is going to, again, suspend, say you can't take delivery, you can only trade for liquidation. So what will happen, Robert, is when things are calm, you're going to have this paper gold and think you're protected. But when the system breaks and buying panic breaks out and the price skyrockets, and you say, okay, now I want my physical gold, you're going to find you can't get it. So I wouldn't trade any or own any of those contracts with any degree of comfort. You have to have the physical gold to get the protection you want.
Our special guest today is James Rickards. The first book I read of his was Currency Wars 2011. His next book is The Death of Money, coming out in 2014, and his latest book is The New Case for Gold, comes out April 2016. He sent me, gratefully, a chapter 2 of the book. I had a book study. I recommend study. I practice what I preach. And the study of chapter 2 just blew people's minds, because it's why gold and silver are the only true money available there. And James uses the periodic table of elements. Fascinating way of looking at gold. What do you think, Kim?
Well, here's an interesting thing, too, because I would highly recommend getting the book. I can't wait to read the whole book, The New Case for Gold, because I know James has experienced this. Robert and I have experienced this. We talk about gold and silver, and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go get some gold. I'm going to get some gold. And then you come a year later, well, did you get your gold? And No, I never got it.
Where do you find it? Where do you find it?
Yeah. So there is a bit of urgency I'm picking up from James in this whole thing. So I'm fascinated to learn what you see, James, coming down the pike.
And just a few years ago, I was down in Peru, and I talked to the Central Bank of Peru, and they store dollars. They don't save gold. In other words, this world is just papered over. There's no real gold. There's paper. And as James said earlier in this program, we should listen to again, the people that have gold don't want you to own gold. That's kind of an interesting thing. They'd rather have you own paper. And so as promised, I want to have James talk about what he sees coming over the horizon and why he senses there will be a panic when people realize that they've been sold gold that does not exist or it's only in paper. Any comments on that, James?
Yeah, no, I'd love to lean forward a little bit. I think that really serves the listeners well. And well, first of all, when I talk about the collapse of the international monetary system, it doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean we all go live in caves with canned goods or whatever. The international monetary system actually has collapsed 3 times in the past 100 years: 1914, 1939, and 1971. All 3 times there were major shocks to the system, but it wasn't the end of the world. What it means is that big financial and trading powers, the United States and Germany and Russia and China, they get together, sit around the table, kind of like a Bretton Woods-style conference, and they reform the system. They say, okay, the old system failed. What is the new system going to be? And that's what I try to do for readers is say, okay, look, you can see the failure coming. That's easy. And let's think it through, and what does the new system look like, and what can you do today to preserve wealth and protect your portfolio under this new system? And think of it as a poker game. So China, Russia, the U.S., Germany, a few other countries are going to sit down and play a game of poker. What do you want in a poker game? You want a big pile of chips, right? Well, in this new game, the chips are going to be gold. And this is why China and Russia are scrambling to buy gold. They got very low, because they were losers in the Cold War. Taiwan took the gold from China. Russia actually sold their gold to get hard currency to help fight the Cold War. They lost the Cold War. So they've been rebuilding their gold reserves ever since. And by the way, the U.S. has been very accommodating about that. I keep asking my friends in the intelligence community and the military community, why don't we stop China from getting all this gold? It's like allowing them to build their military, because as far as I'm concerned, gold is not only money, it's also a financial weapon. But this is sort of the globalized mindset, the post-national mindset. They actually want China to get the gold. So, because, you can't have a poker game if one guy has all the chips. It's not a very good poker game, so they want to spread the chips around. So that's why they want China to get this gold. So when the system collapsed, again, I say these things, and people go, "Oh, that would never happen," and I'm not worried about that. I'm sorry, in 1987, October 1987, the stock market crashed 22% in one day, not a week or a month or a year, but one day. That would be the equivalent of 4,000 Dow points today. That would be a 22% drop approximately. If the Dow dropped 400 points, people would be panicked. It would be front-page news. It would be on every website all over the world. Imagine 4,000 points. So that's what happened in 1987. 1998, the world was hours away from every stock and bond exchange in the world shutting down. And I know that because that was the LTCM panic. I negotiated that bailout for LTCM. I had a front-row seat. I was in the room on the phone with the Federal Reserve, on the phone with the Treasury and other government agencies and all the big banks, and we knew the whole global system was going down, but we managed to move $4 billion to bail out the fund and kind of save the day. And everyone, forgets about that, but it was hours away from shutting down. 2000, the dot-com crash. 2007, the mortgage crash. 2008, the financial panic. How many times do these things have to happen before people say, you know what, it's just a matter of time? Before it happens again, it's been 8 years since the last one. We probably don't have that much more time. But the next time it's going to be different. It's going to be bigger. The system is more interconnected. What did we hear about in 2008, Robert? We heard too big to fail, too big to fail, too big to fail. Well, guess what? The 5 biggest banks in the United States today are bigger. They control a larger percentage of all the banking assets. Their derivatives books are much bigger. So everything that was too big to fail in 2008 is bigger today. So what do you think is going to happen the next time? It's going to be an exponentially bigger failure. But now the central banks are not going to be able to ride to the rescue because they printed so much money to bail out in 2008. They never normalized. They never took the money back. And so we've got the situation where we're set up for the greatest financial panic in history, much bigger than 2008, bigger than central banks' ability They're going to have to lock down ATMs, lock down banks, lock down money market funds. They're not going to print their way out the next time. They're going to lock it down and tell you can't have your money back. That's why you want some physical gold today. But here's the problem. My contacts all over the world in refining, in vaults, in banks, in the physical gold world, they're already seeing shortages, severe shortages. So when you have this panic, and people say, wait a second, they're locking down the digital money system. They're locking down the paper money system. I want some gold because that's something they can't lock down. You can't hack it. You can't erase it. That's going to preserve my wealth. Guess what? It's going to be too late. You're not going to be able to get it. So get some now. Put it in safe storage. You'll be protected when the panic comes. But don't think when the price of gold goes from $2,000 to $3,000 an ounce, and you say, okay, I get it. I believe it. I'm ready. Get me some gold. You're not going to be able to get it.
Well, let me ask you this question. Another rumor I heard is that the U.S. or Fort Knox doesn't have much gold. It's not been audited. Is that true or not true?
Well, you just said two things, Robert. It's not been audited. That is true. I have good reason to believe the gold is there. I don't buy all this, the Fort Knox is empty. I think that's nonsense. But let me make a few other points. The gold could be leased. I mean, just because it's there, it doesn't mean there are no claims on it. That gold is leased in part. The gold of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York is leased. By the way, all the U.S. gold is not at Fort Knox. It's about half at Fort Knox and half at West Point, which it's funny. They're both Army bases. People say, who controls the gold, the Fed or the Treasury? I tell them the U.S. Army controls it because it's at two military bases, Fort Knox and West Point. The gold at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York does not belong to the United States. That belongs to everybody else. So all these other countries in the IMF keep a lot, not all, but keep a lot of their gold at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. There's a lot of gold out at JFK Airport and warehouses run by Scotiabank and HSBC and a few others in Brinks. So that's where the gold is. The gold's there, but it's leveraged, it's hypothecated, it's leased, and that leasing is used to allow the bullion banks that I talked about earlier to sell 100 bars of gold for every bar of physical they have title to. So it's not that the gold isn't there; it is there, but it's been leased out. Now the other thing.
So it's leased out. It's leased out to the banks. So that is this all part of the ETF?
Right. Who ETFs or these unallocated gold contracts? So the Treasury can lease it to the banks, and then the banks can sell 100 times that gold. So let's say the Treasury leases 10 tons to J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan can then sell 1,000 tons to the market on this leveraged unallocated basis. So it's a kind of Ponzi, but it doesn't mean the vaults are empty. It just means it's been leased out and heavily leveraged, and that's how they suppress the price. Now, as far as the audit is concerned, people say, well, that proves the gold's not there because they won't audit it. But to me, it actually proves the opposite because the gold is there, but what do you audit? What are the things that you audit? You audit important things. You audit financial accounts. You audit corporations. You audit. You do other audits of important things. The government does not want you to think that gold is important. The government wants you to think that gold is unimportant. So the reason they don't audit it is because they want you to think it doesn't matter. Why would you pay attention to something that's not important? So, in other words, they don't do the audit because they don't want you to think about gold. What if they actually did the audit? That would be the government saying, hey, gold's really important to us. We're going to do an audit. They don't want you to think that. So by the way, I favor the audit. I'm all in favor of auditing it. Some of the presidential candidates have come out in favor of that. So I think the gold should be audited. But the point I'm making is not auditing it is a way to get you not to think about it. So it's part of the brainwashing.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is James Rickards. His latest book is The New Case for Gold. His website is jamesrickardsproject.com. And I would say he is the smartest guy I know when it comes to this, not just gold, but currency and world affairs. You said that the next, pushing the can down the road, they're going to push with the IMF and all that. They're going to have, it's now going to come home to roost with the biggest guys in the world. I mean, what did you mean by that in Chapter 2 of The New Case for Gold?
Well, the last crisis was bailed out by the Federal Reserve. They printed over $3 trillion of new money. They did over $10 trillion of swap lines, so-called, with the foreign central banks. in conjunction with the FDIC and the Treasury, they guaranteed every money market fund in America. They guaranteed every bank deposit in America. They went to extraordinary lengths. The problem is most of that policy has not been reversed. It hasn't been normalized. That $4 trillion is, they started with $800 billion. They printed $3.2 trillion, so they've got $4 trillion on the balance sheet. That money is still there. It's still out there. So what are they going to do when the next crisis comes? Are they going to print another $4 trillion, take it up to $8 trillion, $12 trillion, $16 trillion? I mean, where's the point at which confidence is lost? Now, legally, they can do this. I understand that. But there will come a time when people just say, you know what? There's no end to this. It's never going to stop. I've lost confidence in it. Get me out of this system. And the Fed will probably understand that they cannot pass that confidence limit. So having printed all this money, and it's not just the Fed. Believe it or not, the People's Bank of China printed more money than the Fed. The ECB, same thing. Bank of England, Japan, all these central banks have printed money. They haven't taken it back. They're not going to be able to print more, double, triple, quadruple to bail out the next time. So how are we going to re-liquefy the world in the next financial panic? The answer is the IMF is going to print the money. The International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF. They're going to print the money. It's world money. Has a geeky name called Special Drawing Rights, or SDRs, but you don't have to buy into the geeky name. Just think of it as world money printed by the IMF. They're going to try to do that. Now, my question is, will it work? They're definitely going to try. They've said so. Those papers are out there. You can find that. I talked about that in my books. But will it work? If people lose confidence in dollars and euros, are they going to have more confidence in world money, which is just printed money from the IMF? Probably not. So that they'll try it. It may work because people don't really understand it and they'll pull the wool over their eyes, but it may fail because people see through it. In that case, they're going to have to go back to gold. Now, there is not one central bank in the world that wants a gold standard. I can guarantee that. But they may not want it, but they may have to do it to restore confidence. And when it does, you're going to see prices of $10,000 an ounce or higher. That's not a made-up number. It's not a number I picked to, grab attention or grab headlines. That is I've calculated it, and others have also, that is the implied non-deflationary price of gold. If you have a lower price for gold, you're going to depress the system because there won't be, that amount of gold at a lower price won't support the amount of finance and commerce out there and trade. So you're going to have a price that's high enough to support world finance. Now, people say there's not enough gold to have a gold standard. That's nonsense. There's always enough gold. It's just a question of price.
I want to thank James Rickards. He is the smartest guy I know on this subject. Kim and I were with him down in Cancun, Mexico. I tell you, listening to that guy, he's like a fire hose coming at you. And then I was with him with the real estate guy's cruise in Miami. He is amazing. There was a panel of people discussing gold and silver, but it's not about gold and silver. It's about the world economy relative to gold and silver. So he's a fantastic speaker, right, Kim?
Oh, he is, and it was fascinating, even in the beginning, talking about the war room and the war game that they created, Pentagon created, and it's all coming to fruition. It's all happening now, and this was a game. This was a simulation, and they took it, and it's actually happening on how they manipulate. It's fascinating.
So let's talk about what Kim and I did. Is that I like gold and silver. I was in Vietnam in 1972, and I saw the Vietnamese people panicking because they knew the United States was abandoning the war, and the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, didn't want money; they wanted gold. So I became a gold bug in 72, and I started buying gold overseas because, as James said, you weren't allowed to buy gold. That's how much the governments do not want you to buy gold. Another thing about gold, just FYI, is if you buy gold at, say, $1,000 and it goes up to $2,000, which it has, so you got $1,000, they're going to tax you at 35%. They really don't want you to own gold. So that's why if you have a chance, go to Rich Dad Radio, listen to this program 2 or 3 times. Understand there's a war on gold because, as James says, the people that have the gold don't want you to own it. I think that's kind of an interesting concept, right?
It is. Yeah, it is.
And Kim and I have bought gold and silver for years. In fact, we're buying silver at about $3 an ounce and went up to $7 an ounce. and we bought our first house up in Portland,
Yeah.
Oregon. What did you have to do, Kim?
Well, it was pretty funny because this was our very first house we were buying, our personal residence. We were living at the time, renting a place in La Jolla, California, and we were buying this house in Portland, Oregon. Now, our credit was horrible. We had no cash. Our business, we were just starting with our business. It was just starting to grow. And the realtor, who also was the homeowner, said, after months, she finally goes, "You finally got approved for credit. You finally got approved for a loan, for a mortgage." And we're like, "Oh my God, yeah, this is great. This is great." So Robert's out of town, and she calls me and she goes, "Yep, you got approved, and you need the down payment of $23,000 by tomorrow noon." And I'm like, $23,000? We don't have $23,000. What am I going to do?
In cash.
In cash. What are we going to do? And so I look into our little clothes closet, and here, stacked against the wall, were bars, silver bars, stacked in lots of silver bars. And I'm like, there's our down payment. So I took grocery bags, brown grocery bags, and I loaded them up with these silver bars, which were heavy. And I walked down the street to a precious metals dealer with my bags of silver, cashed them in, and that's how we got our first house in Portland, Oregon.
So for those of you who are broke today, that's how we started. We've been broke too. We've been gold and silver broke for years. So now getting back, again, thanks to James Rickards. His website is jamesrickardsproject.com. Please listen to this program again. And going to the most favorite part of our program is Ask Robert, and you can submit your questions at richdadradio.com. So, Melissa, what's the first question for Ask Robert?
Our first question today comes from Ramon in Mexico. Favorite book, Cash Flow Quadrant. He said, what should be the first step to invest in gold?
The first step is I would get James Rickards' book, The New Case for Gold. The second thing I would do is download this program, listen to it 2 or 3 times, and then have your good friends listen to it 2 or 3 times, and then discuss. That's what I did on the Real Estate Guys cruise just recently out of Miami, is the whole class, about 100 of us, discussed this thing that Rickards was saying. And the reason I say discussion is interesting is you're going to find so many people have opinions. They don't own any gold. They don't own any silver. They may have an ETF or something, but they have all these effing opinions about gold and silver, and they don't hear what Rickards is saying. You know, so when we have a book study, not a book reading, the study is what is Rickards saying. And these people were talking about seashells and all this goofy stuff, not talking about gold and silver. So get together your group, study it, discuss it, and keep those idiots not talking about seashells, and ask yourself, what is Rickards saying, not what your silly opinion is, because Rickards is the smartest guy I know on this subject right now.
And I would also say to Ramon one thing about The New Case for Gold. James Rickards did say this book is very practical also, because a lot of people come and they say, I don't know what kind of gold to buy. Should I buy, what's the word, the collectible type of gold?
Numismatic. Numismatic means a rare gold. You don't want to buy numismatic.
He's just talking about what kind of gold to buy, which is just pure physical gold, where to buy it, how to store it, all the practical stuff that a lot of people, they ask the question and they never find the answers. So there are a lot of answers in there on how to get started with your first gold buy.
And please understand, most people will buy ETFs, which is paper gold. And what James was saying is this. When you cash in your ETF, they're going to pay you in more paper. If you can understand that,
you're not going to get gold.
And that the biggest holders of gold don't want you to own gold, if you can get your brain around that, you'll see a whole nother world for gold. But until then, you'll sit around with the rest of the idiots. They'll say, well, I should have, coulda. I should have bought some gold. I should have bought some silver. But you didn't. And the reason is they're full of opinions. And what James said was crucial. The people that have the gold don't want you to own it. If you can get your brain around that one, and when you trade in your ETF or your other paper gold, they're going to give you more paper. You see, when you can understand that, you'll be a lot brighter than most of the monkeys on the street. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from John in Vancouver, British Columbia. Favorite book, Cash Flow Quadrant. His question is this. Japan's interest rates just went negative. What kind of effects on assets could we see if America was to do the same, and how long can they continue to carry on that experiment?
Well, you have to understand all coins have three sides. You have heads, tails, and the edge, and you got to look at the other side of it. Why? The question is, why would they go to zero interest rates and then negative interest rates? Why would they charge you money to keep cash? It's as James said on there, they printed too much money. The U.S. printed $4 trillion. The rest of the world printed $1 trillion. All this cash is sitting out there. They don't want your cash. They want you to borrow money. They want you to be a debtor. And everybody right now, well, not everybody, most people are paying off bills or saving money and all this. But if you don't borrow money, money is not created. See, money is only created. Paper money is only created when you borrow money. When you use your credit card, money is created. They want you to go into debt. That's why when Rich Dad, we talk about good debt and bad debt. So they want you to borrow. That's why it's going to negative interest rates. The other thing, too, as Rickards said on the Real Estate Guy's Cruise, is that the number one product being sold in Japan today are safes for your home, because people would rather buy a safe than keep their money in a bank.
Well, I would think so. I would think that if all of a sudden the banks say, well, you're not going to have to pay us to keep your money here, I would think there's going to be a run on the banks because people are going to want to get their cash out.
That's the fear of the banks. If people start, let's call a run on the bank, and the bank shuts the door, then you're SOL, man. I mean, at that point, you're going to say, well, what am I going to spend? So that's why what James is saying is you should have a safe. You should not near your house, away from you, with cash, gold, and silver in there, just in case everything shuts down. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Amber in Austin, Texas. Do you think the future includes Americans trying to buy food and fuel with gold and silver?
I think that's a great question, because we should have three sides of a coin, heads, tails, and the edge. You want to be as pessimistic as you can and also be as optimistic as you can. Then you'll see the big picture. So the reason Kim and I like food is you have to eat it, And we always talk about the Rich Dad radio show is that there's four kinds of precious metals: gold, silver, guns, and bullets. And the reason you want guns and bullets is because if you have food and your neighbor doesn't, your neighbor will not be your friend anymore. Any comments, Kim?
Well, and we've said it before, is that we prepare for the worst. So we don't really have to think about it. We've got the food, we've got the gold, we've got silver, we've got water. We've got
4 Gs.
Yes.
5
so
Gs.
if it doesn't, I hope it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, no problem. We're fine. If it does happen, though, we're prepared and we don't have to keep thinking about it. So
Look,
I would just get to take some action.